Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating and honestly highly practical world of Philippine labor law. Now, if you think about it, at its absolute core, labor law really exists for one primary reason: to balance out the natural power dynamic in the employer-employee relationship. Because let's face it, an employer naturally holds the capital, the resources, and the jobs, right? So to prevent that relationship from becoming completely one-sided, the law steps in. It acts as this great equalizer. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to look closely at the specific constitutional principles and statutory rules that make up this incredibly vital safety net. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We'll be covering number 1, the rule book; 2, the economic force; 3, the property right; 4, the scales of social justice; 5, shared responsibility; and finally, number 6, the tiebreaker. Starting things off with Section 1, the rule book. This is where we map out the foundational legal basis of our labor laws. So you can think of Philippine labor law as being built on 4 main pillars. At the international level, we've got baselines like the International Labor Organization Conventions 87 and 98. And here's a really interesting fact about those. They're actually so inclusive that even alien workers with valid permits are allowed to unionize in the Philippines, provided their home country offers reciprocal rights to Filipinos or has ratified these same ILO conventions. Pretty cool, right? Then, zooming into the national level, the 1987 Constitution provides our supreme mandates, while the Civil Code gives us the rules for interpretation. And finally, the whole thing is operationalized by the Labor Code. That acts as our primary piece of social legislation, and it's specifically designed to reduce economic and social inequalities. Taking a slightly closer look at the 1987 Constitution, it is just incredibly comprehensive when it comes to defending the worker. These protections aren't just hidden in one little corner. They're woven throughout the entire document. Article 2 mandates a just social order. Article 3, the Bill of Rights, guarantees due process and the right to form unions in both the public and private sectors. Then you have Article 12, prioritizing Filipino labor in the national economy. Article 13 is an absolute powerhouse for social justice and security of tenure. And get this, Article 16 even goes as far as mandating the review and increase of pensions for retirees. It is literally a top-to-bottom protective mantle. Moving right along to Section 2, the economic force. Here we look at the state's fundamental view of labor as the primary engine driving society. Look at the very specific phrasing used in Article 2, Section 18 of the Constitution. It says, the state affirms labor as a primary social economic force. Notice that it doesn't just casually acknowledge labor, it actually affirms it. And because of this powerful declaration, the state is constitutionally required to actively protect the rights of workers and promote their welfare. It's not just a polite suggestion, it is a fundamental duty of the government. And that specific mandate translates directly into the policy of full protection to labor. Now, what you really need to take away from this is that full protection applies universally. Whether you're working locally or overseas, whether you're part of a massive labor union or completely unorganized, you absolutely fall under the protective mantle of Philippine labor law. And honestly, the best part, this protection applies regardless of any sneaky stipulations you might have signed in an employment contract. You literally cannot contract away your constitutional rights. No way. All right, Section 3, the property right. Let's unpack security of tenure and equal opportunity. Now, what's really fascinating about this is how the law actually views your job. Legally speaking, a job isn't just a gig or a temporary arrangement. Your employment is considered a literal property right. Under the constitutional guarantee of security of tenure, your job is completely safeguarded by due process of law. That means every single employee is protected against arbitrary and unjust deprivation of their livelihood. Simply put, your employer cannot just take your job away on a whim without proper lawful justification and procedure. And this constitutional property right over your job goes perfectly hand in hand with the state's absolute duty to promote equal work opportunities. The state is constitutionally tasked to push for full employment and equality of opportunities for everyone, because at the end of the day, everyone deserves a fair shot at acquiring that property right, a decent job. Section 4, the scales of social justice. This is all about balancing power, but definitely not about countenancing wrongdoing. In Philippine jurisprudence, social justice is defined as the humanization of laws and the equalization of social and economic forces by the state. The ultimate goal here is economic stability and promoting the general welfare of the people. It's like a giant scale.
Because the employer naturally has the capital, the state essentially uses the law to weigh down the employee's side of the scale, allowing true justice to actually be approximated.
And this brilliantly illustrates an absolutely crucial nuance. While social justice is an equalizer and might mitigate penalties for the underprivileged, it is definitely not a tool to oppress management or capital. Fairness always prevails, right? And very importantly, the courts have ruled time and time again that social justice is never intended to countenance wrongdoing or serve as a refuge for scoundrels. So no, you can't steal from your employer and then try to hide behind the shield of social justice.
Which brings us to Section 5, Shared Responsibility, focusing on the right to self-organization. The state guarantees a whole bundle of rights under the banner of self-organization. Workers can form unions, they can negotiate through collective bargaining, engage in peaceful, concerted activities, and even strike legally. But crucially, workers are also legally entitled to participate in the actual policy and decision-making processes that affect their rights and benefits. So you literally have a legally protected seat at the table. But here is the key context for all of that. These rights build directly into the concept of shared responsibility. Organizing rights aren't just handed out to create endless conflict or to wage war against employers. Rather, they're specifically designed to give workers a voice so that both parties can foster industrial peace together. It really is a shared responsibility to keep the economic engine running smoothly for everyone's benefit. Finally, Section 6, the tiebreaker. Let's look at how the law actually resolves deadlocks. I want you to picture a scenario for a second. An employee sues their employer. They end up in court or before a labor arbiter. The employer presents their evidence and the employee presents theirs. So what happens when the dispute results in a dead tie? What does the law actually demand when neither side presents better, more substantial evidence than the other? Well, the answer is something called the equipoise rule. Under Philippine labor law, if both parties fail to present substantial evidence to prove their allegations, meaning the evidence is in absolute equipoise or perfectly balanced, the scales of justice automatically tilt in favor of labor. It's that simple. The worker wins the tie, period. And you'll find the basis for this crucial point right here in Article 4 of the Labor Code. All doubts in the implementation and interpretation of the provisions of this code shall be resolved in favor of labor. This mandates a highly liberal and sympathetic approach to workers. Because the state recognizes the inherent disadvantage of the employee, its policy is profoundly compassionate towards labor whenever a genuine doubt exists. And this protective stance isn't just isolated to the Labor Code either. It's heavily reinforced by Article 1702 of the Civil Code. That article dictates that any doubts in labor legislation, and specifically in labor contracts, must be construed in favor of the safety and decent living of the laborer. This means your employment contract is fundamentally interpreted by the legal system to protect you, not to trick you. So we've seen how the rulebook is written, how your job is literally your property, and how the scales are legally tipped to give you a fair fight. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. With the scales legally tipped to protect you, how will you use this knowledge to ensure a fair balance of power in your own workplace? Because knowing your rights is absolutely the very first step in exercising them. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.